I'd like to talk about how there's an illuminated level of seeing that Father Anthony Bloom calls seeing in a light with a depth, seeing in a light with a depth. This is a level of heightened perception such that you see someone as a potent possibility, as a candidate for transfiguration. It's almost magically to see another human being's sacred dignity and his or her possible destiny, both in this life and in the life to come. It's to see someone as all lit up and full of depth. This, I think, is the fine art of seeing another human being in the best of all possible lights. Now, it may take some extreme situation, a blessed or tragic moment, for such a unique revelation to occur. As Father Anthony Bloom puts it, there are blessed or tragic moments when we can see a person revealed to us in a light with a depth, with an awesome beauty which we have never suspected before. Suddenly, in other words, there occurs a breakthrough in perception, and in a flash of recognition, a certain glory is noticed. I believe I saw this with an aunt, an aunt that I was visiting with last week, and my wife confirmed and exclaimed that indeed she'd seen the same, and it really was a glory. It was beholding another human being's high estate, her special particularity, what it is that makes her unique. So I think that to be on the receiving end of this kind of perception is to be given a great, astounding gift. This is a gift of recognition that a best friend might give you, or perhaps a great parent, a teacher, or spiritual leader. What's being communicated is your own uniqueness, your spectacular potential. And you're not likely to forget it if somebody has discerned the great thing that you're capable of becoming. I often think in this regard of that level of perception described by the poet Yeats as when someone recognizes the pilgrim soul in you. Your pilgrim soul is the highest and best part of you, which is that holy longing that searches for meaning and authenticity. In his poem, Yeats is asking the love of his life to recall when she is old, gray, full of sleep, and nodding by the fire. That one man, he wants her to remember that one man loved the pilgrim soul in you. Well, Yeats wanted the love of his life to remember in her final days that he'd always loved what was particular about her. He loved her highest and best self. He loved her distinctiveness. He loved her own pilgrim soul. In days gone by, others had seen her through a dimmer light. They had therefore seen only her surface charms, that is, her physical beauty, her moments of glad grace. Now, the pilgrim soul in you might also be called the autonomous self, according to Peter Berger. Your autonomous self is the phrase Berger uses to emphasize the splendor of your own particularity, like the radiance of your own independence, your blessed separateness. Professor Peter Berger writes about how crucial it is to experience such a distinctively developed sense of self. Growth into a sure and strong sense of self is crucial if we're able to discern what Berger calls the sense of reality. Berger's saying, in fact, that it's absolutely crucial to become distinguished and defined enough to be able to discern what is real and what isn't. To be such a person in full is also to be, I'm going to add here, it's to be a refined critic. It is to be wonderfully skeptical. For as another modern sage, Daniel N. Robinson, has said, you must be able to say that no matter how much this means to me, no matter how centered my being is on this pattern of beliefs, no matter how close I am, personally and emotionally, and even romantically, to those who hold such convictions, I must reserve the right to question and to doubt. No position, therefore, especially your own, is beyond criticism. In fact, you must always be prepared to fully launch a skeptical spotlight upon even your most cherished beliefs, opinions, and values. Because if you fail to exercise your own critical faculty, it's an indication that you've fallen into either a secular or it could be a religious fundamentalism, which is a contracted state or condition that is living in an unquestioning shelter of some kind. And so it is, says Professor Robinson, and I quote, "I will retain this skeptical bias as an obligation owed to my own rationality, my own integrity." If, Robinson warns, you lose that reason and suspend that criticality and become gullible and accept anything that custom serves up, you enter the life of a puppet on a string. So the danger, therefore, of existing as an undeveloped and uncritical humanoid is that you are inadequately prepared to resist the pressure that is inevitably going to come from those political and philosophical movements that have proven time and time again to be highly successful at assimilating foolish people into their orbit and robbing them of their individual freedom and dignity, which was, of course, repeated all through the 20th century, where a series of collectivizing movements encircled, enclosed, and obliterated millions upon millions. Well, these movements were eventually seen to be primarily about requiring their followers to subordinate their sense of individuality into their enslaving circles. So I'm using this word circle to make the point that there are movements which have a centripetal emphasis, a centripetal focus. The centripetal way is to pull you into the circle and wrap you up tightly. And yes, you may feel very cozy in your circle. Isn't that nice? Also cozy. Cozier than you've ever felt before. And yes, you may feel more united than you've ever felt with your group of like-minded circle dwellers, but you're in the circle trap, you just don't know it. In other words, if you end up in the circle of a centripetal movement, you're in trouble. For like so many others before you, you're in a circle that's going to gradually suffocate the life out of you. For the fact is, as Jeff Dunn puts it, you cannot grow in a circle. It's a finite shape. It cannot grow larger or smaller. Circles, he says, may be a perfect shape, but they cannot change. They're stuck in being what they are. Which is why you think of like why on the Borg ship, Star Trek, one drone looks like every other member of the collective. Whereas on the Starship Enterprise, where individuality is encouraged, the crew members are radically different from each other. Peter Berger's emphasis is to become established enough in your own selfhood that you'll be able to stand against any enclosing, collectivistic, socialistic circle. He's arguing that it takes a fully developed self, like a person in full, to resist the spirit of the age, which is always the latest version of collectivism. Now, a fully fledged self will feel the compelling necessity to say no to the collectivistic impulse in any of its manifestations. I mean, the mature person will feel that it's like a divine imperative to say no to every denial of the autonomous self in whatever form it is presented. He'll walk away as soon as his educated as soon as his educated self senses that he's about to be encircled and swallowed up. He'll feel compelled, therefore, then, to reject the Buddhist understanding of anatta. Have you heard that term? Anatta is its doctrine of no self, which is related to the Buddhist three universal truths. Well, the first of these three universal truths, according to Buddhism, is that first, all reality is impermanent. The second, all reality is suffering. The third, the reality is not self, anatta. For the sake of one's integrity, a person in full will feel obliged to utter a threefold no, according to Peter Berger, a threefold no to the Buddha's three universal truths. That is, like standing tall, he'll boldly position himself against any such negations of the self and the world. So first of all, therefore, he'll say no to the first universal truth that all reality is impermanence, for he will express his opposing conviction that at the heart of the reality is the God who is the plenitude of being, time, and eternity. Secondly, he'll say no to the doctrine that reality is suffering by affirming instead the point of biblical religion, that God's creation is ultimately good because God is acting to redeem the creation. And thirdly, he'll say no to the doctrine that all reality is not non-self because of his conviction, in contrast, that the self is the image of God. As Berger states it, the self, that is your own personhood, exists by virtue of God's address. Yourself, your personhood, exists by virtue of God's address. Now, the contrast to the centripetal movement, which puts small, undiscerning selves into self-negating circles, is the centrifugal emphasis of the New Testament. The centrifugal focus of the New Testament is that it inspires and enables a radical breakout out of the circle. Its radically different symbol is the cross that breaks the iron grip of any enclosing collectivistic circle. The power of divine grace, in other words, breaks you out of finite circles into infinite possibilities. And thus it is that when the light shines in the New Testament, the identity of the human being is radically sharpened and defined. You become more what you are. As in the case of Jesus Christ himself, who upon Mount Tabor was transfigured and seen for who he was in the deepest possible sense. So Christ was transfigured, and as he was transfigured, so was everything around him. Everything was lit up in its own particularity. The entire creation was lit up by the power and grace of God. Here is an utterly incomparable affirmation of a life in particular and of all of life in general. What's being affirmed is that the creation is not headed towards dissolution, but towards transfiguration. The almost incredible affirmation is that the transfigured human being will transcend all limitations, including death itself. For from the New Testament perspective, the human being who opens his life to the grace and power of God is destined to be transfigured. Well, this is the highest possible view there could be of human nature as being capable of transfiguration. This is in such a marked contrast to those views that diminish the self or diminish personhood as but a mere reflection, a shadow, or a condensation of the divine, like as a minor aspect of God's existence. Rather, and this is a very big rather, the life-affirming message of the New Testament is that the goal of life is to become fully yourself, is to be transfigured and glorified. So the message is that you will be transfigured into a glory that was only barely even glimpsed in this lifetime. Indeed, the future is not to lose your identity, but to find it fully. The ultimate encounter then between man and God is the divine recognition of your own particular essence.